The doctor's hand trembled as he slipped me a note that read only 2 words: "Leave now." At first I thought it was a mistake, but that night I discovered the terrifying truth. My own family, the people I had loved and sacrificed everything for, were plotting to erase me and steal everything I owned. What they did not know was that I carried a secret powerful enough to turn their plan against them. What followed was a battle of betrayal, deception, and shocking revelations that would change all of our lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let me take you back to the night when it all began. The doctor's hand had trembled as he pressed that crumpled note into my coat pocket, and though his expression had tried to remain calm, I caught the flicker of fear in his eyes. I walked out of his office with my heart thudding like a drum, my thoughts tangled in confusion. What could he have meant by those words? Leave now. Had I misread his expression, or had something far darker taken root in the corners of my life without me ever noticing? The rain outside clung to the streets in thin, shimmering sheets, and the town of Blackmoor seemed to hold its breath. The old gas lamps that lined the street cast pale halos in the mist, making the night appear like a half-forgotten dream. I pulled my coat tighter around me and hurried into a cab waiting at the corner. The driver gave me a curious glance when I climbed in water dripping from my umbrella, but he said nothing. I sat in silence, one hand brushing the folded paper hidden in my pocket. The temptation to open it clawed at me with every passing moment, yet I could not bring myself to unfold it. Not here, not under the driver's watchful eyes. Instead, I stared out of the fogged window as the cab carried me along the winding streets toward Harrow House. The mansion stood on the cliffs above the sea, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. It had been my home for decades, but that night as it rose into view, the house seemed to loom with a menace I had never felt before. The driver left me at the iron gates, and I walked the rest of the way, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. By the time I reached the front steps, my hand shook so violently that it was difficult to fit the key into the lock. Inside the house was warm, but the warmth felt oppressive, as if the very air conspired to smother me. Marcus was in the sitting room when I entered, lounging in his chair with a glass of whiskey balanced in his hand. His wife Clara sat beside him, her posture elegant, her eyes cold, and across from them my granddaughter Iris sat cross-legged on the sofa with her phone glowing in her lap. Their conversation stopped the instant I opened the door. Silence swelled through the room like a tide, and I could feel their gazes measuring me, weighing me. Mother Marcus said finally, standing as if to greet me, "How was your appointment?" "Fine," I replied, my voice steady, though my chest felt hollow. "The doctor says I am in excellent health." Clara's lips tightened ever so slightly, a flicker of disappointment quickly masked by a polite smile. Iris looked up from her phone, her eyes sharp despite the casual lift of her brows. No one said anything more. I excused myself and went upstairs, the note burning against my palm. In the safety of my room, I locked the door and unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The message was written in hurried script, the ink smudged, as though scratched down in haste. "They are planning to bury you alive in your own mind. Leave before the storm breaks." It was signed simply V. Hale. I sat on the edge of my bed, the note clutched between my fingers, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a long while I could not move. Questions battered my mind. Who was planning this? What did he mean by bury me alive in my own mind? And why had Dr. Hale risked everything to warn me? The house creaked around me, each groan of the old wood echoing like a whisper. I thought of Marcus downstairs, his guarded smile, Clara's watchful eyes, Iris's cold indifference. Could he have meant them? My own family. The thought was so monstrous that I recoiled from it, shaking my head. But then I remembered the silence that had greeted me when I stepped inside, the way Clara had hidden those papers behind her back, the flicker of something unreadable in Iris's gaze. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed listening to the restless sighs of the sea outside the cliffs, my ears straining for every sound inside the house. Just after midnight, footsteps crept along the hallway, pausing outside my door. I held my breath, my fingers tightening around the note. A soft murmur followed, then retreating steps. They were whispering about me, I was certain of it. At 2 a.m, I could bear it no longer. I slipped from my bed and pressed my ear to the door. Voices drifted up from the kitchen, low but sharp enough to carry through the vents. "She is stubborn," Clara's voice hissed. "The doctor would not help, but we will find another, someone willing to sign the papers." Marcus replied, his tone calm, steady. "We cannot wait forever. The estate, the pension, the collection, all of it should be ours now, not 10 years from now." And Iris, her young voice colder than I had ever heard it. "I already reserved my place at the university. I need the money this year, not when she finally dies of old age." The words struck me like a blade to the chest. My own blood, the child I had carried in my arms, speaking of me as though I were nothing but a ledger of assets. "Enough," Marcus said. "In a week we tell her about the sanatorium. If she refuses, we use Plan B." "What Plan B?" Iris asked. "We make her believe she has lost her mind, switch her medication, hide her belongings, tell her she said things she never did. In a month, no one will question it when a doctor signs her incompetent." Clara laughed then, a chilling sound. "Once she is inside, we sell the house, take the accounts, and she will vanish into silence. To the world, we will still be the perfect family caring for our poor, ailing mother." Their laughter rose cruel and unfeeling, as though they were telling a joke too vile for the light of day. I stumbled back from the door, my breath ragged the walls of the house, pressing in on me. My mind reeled with disbelief, but the note in my hand confirmed the truth. Dr. Hale had not been mistaken. My family truly meant to destroy me, body and soul. I sank into the chair by the window and stared into the storm churning beyond the cliffs. The waves crashed against the rocks below, spray rising like ghosts in the darkness. My heart was heavy with grief, but beneath the grief something else stirred. A quiet fury, long buried, rising like a tide. They believed I was helpless. They believed I was alone. But they had forgotten that I carried a secret one. My late husband had left me a secret, powerful enough to shatter every scheme they dared to weave. The clock struck 3, the sound hollow in the vast silence of Harrow House. I folded the note carefully and placed it back in my pocket. My decision had already been made. At dawn I would act. Little did I know that the moment I stepped beyond those doors, the game would truly begin, and the shadows within my family would reveal themselves in ways darker than I ever imagined. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon, staining the sea with streaks of crimson and gold. I had not slept, not even for a moment. Instead, I sat in the chair by my window, watching the storm clouds dissolve into morning haze. The house was still, but beneath that silence I could feel the weight of secrets pressing in from every corner. I moved through the halls quietly, every step measured, listening for voices. The portraits of long-gone ancestors stared down at me with cold indifference, their painted eyes seeming to ask why I had allowed strangers to nest in the heart of my home. Perhaps I had been blind for too long, too eager to believe that love was enough to keep a family whole. In the dining room, I found Marcus already waiting. He had changed into one of his fine suits, the kind he wore when he wanted to look important. His glass of whiskey sat untouched on the table, though it was far too early for such a drink. He smiled when he saw me, but the smile was brittle. "Mother," he said warmly, though his voice betrayed the strain beneath. "You look tired. Was it a restless night?" I forced a smile of my own. "A little restless, yes. The storm was loud." He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing, as if trying to read the truth in my expression. For a moment neither of us spoke, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall filled the silence with heavy beats. Then Clara entered, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She carried a stack of papers neatly bound with a leather strap, which she tucked beneath her arm as though shielding them from my sight. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said, her tone smooth but distant. "I trust your appointment went well yesterday." "Perfectly well," I answered. "Dr. Hale says my heart is strong and my health is excellent." Something flickered in her eyes, a fleeting shadow of irritation. She quickly masked it with another polite smile, but I had already seen enough to know. They had hoped for a different report, one that would give them the excuse they needed. From the staircase came the quick patter of feet, and Iris descended, her phone clutched in her hand. She wore the careless expression of youth, but her words cut sharper than any blade. "Morning, Grandma. Still with us, I see." Marcus shot her a warning glance, but she shrugged and sank into a chair, her eyes fixed on the glow of her screen. I watched her for a moment, my chest aching. This was the child I had cradled, the child I had read stories to by the fire. Now she could barely look at me without disdain. The air in the room grew heavier as we ate breakfast together. Every movement felt staged, every word laced with hidden meaning. I asked about Iris's studies, and she muttered vague replies without lifting her eyes. Clara spoke of the weather and the state of the garden, though her fingers never strayed far from the papers she carried. Marcus alone tried to maintain the illusion of harmony, filling the silence with stories from town, but even he could not hide the sharp edge in his voice. I realized then that Dr. Hale had been right. Family is not always what it seems. Later that afternoon, I walked the halls again, letting my hand trail along the carved banisters. The house, once a place of comfort, had become a stage, and each of us was playing a role. From behind a half-closed door, I heard Clara's voice, low and urgent. She was speaking to Marcus. "If we wait too long, someone will notice. We cannot let her wander freely." I held my breath. "We will handle it," Marcus replied. "I have an appointment tomorrow to discuss the matter with a lawyer. Once the papers are in place, there is nothing she can do." "And if she resists?" Clara asked. His voice grew colder. "Then we remind her of her age, her fragility. We make her believe she has no choice." I stepped back, my pulse racing. My suspicions were no longer suspicions. They were certainties. That night, I locked myself in my room once more. Through the thin walls, I heard Iris's laughter drift down the hall, followed by Marcus's voice raised in frustration, then Clara's whispering tones soothing him. I pressed my hands to my temples, trying to steady my breath. They thought me weak, thought me blind, but they had forgotten that I had endured storms far greater than this. When midnight came, I moved silently into the hall, carrying the small recorder I had hidden in my drawer. The air smelled faintly of smoke from the fireplace, and the floorboards creaked beneath my steps. I descended toward the kitchen, guided by the murmur of voices. Once again, they were gathered around the table. "The doctor was useless," Clara said. "He refused to declare her unfit." "We will find another," Marcus replied firmly. "Money speaks louder than truth. And if that fails," Iris chimed in, "then we hurry things along. Everyone already believes she is forgetful. A few misplaced objects, a few strange stories, and they will all think she is losing her mind." Clara laughed softly. "And once she is locked away, the rest is ours. The house, the estate, everything." Their words struck me like cold iron. I pressed the recorder tighter to my chest, my hands trembling but my heart steady. This was the proof I needed, the evidence that would one day expose them. I returned to my room and slipped the recorder beneath my pillow. As I lay in the dark, the storm outside gathered once more, waves crashing violently against the cliffs. Sleep refused to come, but I no longer needed it. My path was clear. I had spent a lifetime protecting this family, giving them everything. Now I would protect myself. But as I closed my eyes, one thought would not leave me. If Marcus and Clara had already gone this far, how much further would they go to silence me? The answer waited in the shadows of the days to come, when their true intentions would unfold in ways more chilling than I dared to imagine. The storm raged through the night, and by morning the air was thick with salt and dampness from the sea. I stood by the tall windows of Harrow House, staring out at the gray waves crashing against the cliffs, my reflection hovering ghost-like on the glass. My heart was heavy with grief, but beneath that grief something new had taken root. A strength I thought I had lost long ago. For hours I wandered the mansion in silence, memories rising with each step. The hallways were filled with echoes of another life. The laughter of my late husband Edward, the sound of Marcus as a boy running down the stairs, the gentle hum of family dinners that once filled these rooms with warmth. Now those echoes mocked me. I had sacrificed decades for them, given them my loyalty, my devotion, and all they saw was the fortune they could carve from my bones. Yet there was one truth they had never known. A secret that Edward had entrusted to me before death carried him away 10 years ago. I remembered the night clearly. He had been weak, his hands trembling as he held a small leather journal. His voice was soft but resolute as he pressed it into my hands. "Evelyn, you must guard this. Do not tell Marcus. Do not tell anyone. There are accounts, investments, a fortune I have built quietly. One day you may need it, and when you do, this will guide you." At the time, I had not wanted to believe him. A secret fortune seemed like a burden rather than a blessing. I had locked the journal away in a hidden compartment behind the library shelves and told myself I would never need it. But now, as I listened to the whispers of betrayal swirling within my own walls, I realized Edward's foresight had been sharper than my own. That evening, when the house was quiet and my family had retired to their rooms, I slipped into the library. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting the room in flickering amber shadows. I traced my hand along the rows of books until my fingers found the familiar groove at the edge of the shelf. With a gentle push, the panel clicked open, revealing the compartment Edward had built all those years ago. Inside lay the leather journal, worn but intact, and beside it a small brass key on a silver chain. I lifted them both with trembling hands. Dust rose into the air, catching the firelight like tiny sparks. I sat at the desk and opened the journal, the scent of old ink and paper filling the air. Edward's handwriting flowed across the pages, neat and precise. There were numbers, names of banks, account details written in code I alone understood. At the back, a folded letter waited. I unfolded it with care and read his words once again. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means life has taken a cruel turn. Do not despair. Enclosed you will find the path to 3 properties abroad and a sum of gold kept in vaults across Switzerland. It is enough to ensure your safety, your freedom, and your dignity no matter what storms you face. Remember, wealth is not only money. Wealth is the power to choose your own fate. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed the letter to my chest. Edward had trusted me with more than just a legacy. He had trusted me with the means to protect myself when the world turned against me. And now that moment had come. I replaced the letter carefully, but kept the journal and the key with me. They were no longer relics of a secret past. They were my weapons. Over the next days, I observed my family with new eyes. At breakfast, Marcus's charm seemed thinner, his temper breaking through the mask more often. Clara grew restless, snapping at the servants and clutching her folders of forged documents as though they were shields. Iris remained distracted, her eyes always fixed on her phone, but I began to notice the way she avoided looking at me directly, as if guilty of more than her words revealed. They believed I was cornered, powerless, an old woman clinging to the remnants of her life. They did not know that I held a fortune greater than they imagined, a fortune that could expose their greed and crush their schemes. But I also understood the danger. If they discovered what I possessed, they would stop at nothing to take it from me, perhaps even my life. So I chose silence. I played my part as the fragile matriarch, nodding at their polite lies, smiling faintly at their hollow reassurances. But inside I was planning. At night, I spread Edward's journal across the desk in my room, copying the codes, memorizing the names of banks and the locations of the properties. I wrote nothing down that they could find, committing every detail to memory. Still, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on me. Could I outwit them? Could I protect myself from those I had once trusted with everything? Doubt gnawed at me, but each time it rose, I opened Edward's letter again and let his words steady my heart. Wealth is the power to choose your own fate. The storm outside grew worse each evening, the sea pounding the cliffs as if trying to tear the house from its perch. I often found myself standing by the window, the journal clutched in my hands, whispering promises to Edward that I would not let his legacy fall into the hands of betrayers. Then one night, as the wind howled and the rain lashed against the glass, I heard footsteps outside my door. The handle turned slowly, testing the lock. My breath caught in my throat. I held the journal tightly, praying the door would hold. After a long pause, the footsteps retreated, leaving only silence behind. But I knew then that time was short. They were growing desperate. They would not wait much longer. I sat down at the desk, lit a candle, and began to write a list of what must be done. I would withdraw funds from one of the accounts to secure immediate safety. I would find allies outside these walls, people my family could not control. And above all, I would gather evidence of their betrayal enough to bring them down if they dared to strike first. The candle burned low as I worked, shadows stretching across the walls. My mind was steady now, sharper than it had been in years. For the first time, I no longer felt like the prey in their cruel game. I felt like a hunter preparing her snare. But even as determination filled me, a question haunted my thoughts. How far would Marcus and Clara go when they realized their plans were slipping away? The answer would come sooner than I expected, when their desperation drove them to choices darker and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The following morning, the air inside Harrow House felt suffocating. The storm had passed, but a strange calm hung over the halls, as though the mansion itself held its breath. I could not shake the memory of footsteps at my door the night before, that soft turn of the handle testing the lock. My family was growing restless, and their patience would not last much longer. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple wool coat and sturdy shoes clothing that would not raise suspicion if I left the house on some errand. In my pocket I carried Edward's leather journal and the brass key wrapped tightly in a handkerchief. These were my lifelines, the only proof that I was not as helpless as Marcus and Clara believed. At breakfast, the performance continued. Marcus greeted me with exaggerated warmth, pouring my tea and asking about my sleep. Clara smiled with her lips but not her eyes, speaking of her plans to reorganize the household staff. Iris barely looked up from her phone, muttering a half-hearted good morning. I forced myself to respond with polite smiles, my voice steady though my heart raced. I excused myself shortly after claiming I needed to visit the apothecary in town. Marcus hesitated, his eyes narrowing for just a moment before he nodded. "Of course, Mother. Do not tire yourself." I walked calmly through the gates, but once the house was out of sight, I quickened my pace. The village streets were quiet in the early hours, the scent of salt and wet stone heavy in the air. Instead of the apothecary, I turned toward the bank. Inside, I approached the teller, a young man with kind eyes who greeted me politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrow. How may I assist you today?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "I need to access a private account. This key should grant me entry." His expression shifted as I handed him the brass key. He disappeared into the back, returning minutes later with a small iron box. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside lay a bundle of documents, neatly sealed envelopes, and a smaller key tagged with a number I recognized from Edward's journal. I requested a withdrawal, modest by the scale of what lay in those accounts, but enough to secure my next steps. £5,000 in cash, discreetly wrapped. The teller gave me a cautious look. "That is a considerable sum to carry, Mrs. Harrow." I smiled faintly. "It is for personal matters." From the bank, I took a cab not back to Harrow House, but to a discreet inn perched on the cliffs beyond the village. The building was old, its stone walls weathered by years of wind and sea spray, but it promised something my own home no longer could: safety. The innkeeper, a tall man with silver hair, gave me a respectful nod as I signed the register. "How long will you be staying, madam?" I hesitated. "Perhaps a week, perhaps longer." He nodded without question and handed me a brass key. My room was small but comfortable, with a view of the restless sea below. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe freely. But hiding was not enough. I could not simply flee and hope my family's greed would burn itself out. They would hunt me, twist. The truth spread lies about my health until the world believed I was the one who had lost her mind. No, I needed allies. I needed someone who could help me turn their own schemes against them. That evening, by the dim glow of the lamp, I opened Edward's journal once more. On the final page, he had scrawled the name of a man I vaguely remembered: Gabriel Wynne, attorney. Years ago, Edward had spoken of him as a brilliant but unorthodox lawyer, a man who thrived on cases others deemed impossible. If anyone could help me expose Marcus and Clara, it would be him. I placed a call from the inn's phone, my voice shaking slightly as I asked for an appointment. To my surprise, Gabriel agreed to meet me the next morning. He arrived precisely at 10. A tall figure in a dark coat, his eyes sharp behind thin glasses, his presence commanding yet calm. "Mrs. Harrow," he said, bowing slightly. "I understand you have a matter of grave importance." I wasted no time. I told him everything: the note from Dr. Hale, the whispered conversations, the forged papers. Clara carried the plan to declare me incompetent. His expression grew darker with each word, his fingers steepled as he listened intently. When I finished, I showed him Edward's journal, the codes, the accounts, the hidden fortune. Gabriel leaned back, his voice low but resolute. "Mrs. Harrow, what your family is attempting is more than betrayal. It is criminal. Elder abuse, conspiracy, fraud, perhaps even attempted coercion. If you are willing, I can help you build a case that will not only protect you, but ensure they face justice." A surge of relief washed through me, but fear lingered at the edges. "They will not stop," I whispered. If they sense I am resisting, they may go further than lies and fraud. Gabriel's eyes sharpened. Then we must act swiftly. I will assign my team to gather evidence. A private investigator will begin immediately. You, however, must remain safe. Do not return to the house unless necessary. That night I lay awake in the inn, the sound of waves pounding against the cliffs below. For the first time, I no longer felt entirely alone. I had allies now, a plan forming in the shadows. Yet the thought of Marcus and Clara discovering my absence chilled me. What lies would they spread when they realized I had slipped from their grasp? My question was answered the very next day. Gabriel's investigator returned with news. Marcus had already been to the bank attempting to access my accounts by claiming I was unwell and in need of guardianship. When the bank refused, he grew agitated and was asked to leave. Clara, meanwhile, had begun selling some of my antiques online, claiming she had permission. And Iris had been telling her friends that I was suffering from advanced dementia, borrowing money in my name. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. I gripped Edward's journal in my hands, my resolve hardening. They thought me weak. They thought me blind. But they had underestimated me. Still, one question burned in my mind as I stared into the dark sea beyond the window. How far would they go when lies and fraud were no longer enough to secure what they desired? The answer, I feared, would arrive sooner than I was prepared for. The days that followed passed in a blur of revelations, each one darker than the last. I remained at the inn on the cliffs, its stone walls weathered but strong, my refuge from the storm gathering within my own family. Each evening, Gabriel Wynne and his investigator returned with new findings, and with every discovery I felt both vindicated and horrified. The first blow struck when Gabriel placed a folder of documents on the table before me. "These are from a source inside the smuggling network at the docks," he explained. "Your son Marcus has been entangled with them for months. Gambling debts drove him there. He owes over £100,000 money he promised to repay once he secured control of your estate." I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Photographs stared back at me. Marcus exchanging envelopes with men whose faces were hidden beneath the hoods of their coats. Marcus stepping into unmarked vans at midnight. Marcus with desperation etched into every line of his face. I felt my stomach turn. The boy I had adopted, raised with love, had become a man who trafficked with criminals in the shadows. But Gabriel was not finished. He slid another folder across the table. "Your daughter-in-law, Clara, has been forging your signature on property deeds. She has already attempted to transfer ownership of 2 parcels of land in your name." The paperwork was stopped only because the notary grew suspicious of her explanations. I stared at the forged documents, each one carrying a version of my name that was not my own. I could almost hear Clara's cold laughter as she practiced my signature late at night, her ambition twisting every stroke of the pen. And then came the most painful revelation of all. Gabriel's investigator cleared his throat, placing a slim dossier before me. "I am sorry, Mrs. Harrow, but your granddaughter Iris has been hiding her own secrets." The pages revealed debts owed to predatory lenders after she had gambled recklessly in digital currencies, losing more than she could ever hope to repay. Worse still, there were messages, dozens of them, where she spoke of me as though I were nothing more than a bank to be drained. My chest ached as I read her words. "I need the money now. She is too old to use it. Once she is gone, everything will be mine." The child I had once carried in my arms, the girl who used to fall asleep against my shoulder, had written these things without a shred of guilt. I thought I could endure no more, but Gabriel's expression grew even more grave. "There is one final discovery, Mrs. Harrow. It may be the most dangerous." He unfolded a single sheet of paper bearing a name that chilled me. The Scribe. The Scribe was a legend whispered among lawyers and investigators, a master forger capable of creating wills, medical records, even entire identities. Few had ever seen his face, and those who had seldom admitted it openly. "Marcus and Clara have engaged his services," Gabriel continued. "They asked him to forge a medical history claiming you suffer from advanced dementia. They also commissioned a false will, naming them sole heirs to your estate." The room spun around me. A false will, a false history, together they could erase me entirely, not just from my home but from existence. If they succeeded, I would become a shadow remembered only as a madwoman who lost her mind and signed away her fortune. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady my breath. "When do they plan to act?" "Soon," Gabriel said. "Very soon. Their debts are crushing them. Desperation makes people reckless." I rose from my chair and walked to the window, staring out at the restless sea below. The waves surged against the rocks, white foam rising like ghosts in the moonlight. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, pale and weary but unbroken. "They believe I am powerless," I whispered. "They believe I have no one to defend me." "But you are not powerless," Gabriel replied firmly. "You have the truth, and soon we will have enough evidence to expose them." That night, alone in my room, I turned Edward's journal over in my hands again and again. I could almost hear his voice reminding me that wealth is the power to choose your own fate. My family thought me cornered, but they had underestimated me. I was no longer the quiet widow sitting silently at the head of the table. I was a woman with allies, with proof, with a fire burning inside me that no storm could quench. Still, the shadows of fear lingered. I knew Marcus and Clara would not wait forever. Their debts would drive them to strike soon, and when they did, it would not be with hesitation. I barely slept, and when dawn came, I walked along the cliffs, the salt spray cool against my skin, the roar of the sea steady in my ears. The world seemed balanced on the edge of a blade, and I knew the next move would decide everything. That afternoon, Gabriel returned with a new report, his face grim. "Your family has arranged a meeting with the scribe tonight. They intend to finalize the forged documents." A chill ran through me. "Tonight." "Yes, they are desperate. They believe you will sign yourself into history as a woman who lost her mind. But they do not know the scribe has been watched by investigators for months. If we move carefully, we can turn this trap into theirs." The words gave me a flicker of hope, but also dread. If Marcus and Clara realized they were cornered, what might they do? Would they still rely on fraud, or would they choose something far darker? As the evening light faded and the sea grew dark beneath the rising moon, I sat in my room, my hands clenched around Edward's journal. Every secret had been revealed, every mask torn away. I knew my family's greed, their lies, their debts, their crimes, but knowledge alone would not save me. Action was coming swift and merciless. I turned down the lamp and sat in silence, listening to the wind batter the shutters. My mind repeated the question I dared not answer aloud. When the night ended, would I still be alive to see the morning? The night after Gabriel's warning, I slept little. I lay awake at the inn, listening to the sea pound against the cliffs below each wave, like the steady beat of a war drum. My family's desperation had driven them into the hands of the scribe, and I knew the moment of confrontation was near. They thought themselves clever, weaving their forgeries and whispering their lies in the shadows. But shadows, I reminded myself, could be pierced by a single flame. By dawn, I had resolved upon a plan. If they wanted to use deception to destroy me, then I would drag their schemes into the light where no lie could survive. The question was how to do it in a way that left them with no escape. Gabriel's investigator found the answer. Clara had scheduled a meeting with a prestigious auction house in the city, planning to sell several of my antiques under the guise of her forged authority. The auction house was known for its grandeur, for the wealth of its patrons, and for the strict legality of its dealings. If I appeared there alive, sane, and in full command of myself, their web of deceit would collapse in full view of witnesses who could not be silenced. The morning of the auction, I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a gown of deep black silk, elegant but commanding, and fastened Edward's locket at my throat. My hair, freshly cut and shining with silver threads, framed my face with dignity. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the frightened widow who had trembled before her family's whispers. I saw a woman ready for war. Gabriel met me outside the inn, his dark coat drawn tight against the morning chill. His eyes searched mine, and when he saw the determination there, he gave a slight nod. "Are you certain of this? Once you step into that hall, there is no turning back." "I am certain," I told him. "They wanted an audience for their lies. I will give them one for the truth." The auction house stood at the heart of the city, its grand facade of marble and gold gleaming in the morning sunday. Inside, the air buzzed with wealth and ambition, the murmur of patrons examining jewels, paintings, and relics waiting to be sold. My footsteps echoed on the polished floor as I entered and heads turned to watch. I felt their gazes linger, whispers rising at the sight of me, but I walked with steady grace to the reception desk. "Good morning," I told the clerk. "I am here to view certain properties." He smiled politely and called for an agent, a man named Richard, who greeted me with the charm of one accustomed to serving the wealthy. "At once, Mrs. Harrow," he said. "Please allow me to show you our finest collection." I followed him into the main gallery, the weight of anticipation heavy in my chest. And then, just as Gabriel had predicted, I heard voices behind me. When I turned, there they were. Marcus, Clara, and Iris, dressed in their finest clothes, their faces carefully arranged into masks of grief and dignity. Clara held a folder of papers in her hands, and Marcus was speaking to another agent. "It is my mother's estate," he explained smoothly. "She is too unwell to manage these matters herself, but as her son, I have full authority to sell." The words hung in the air like poison. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble, my voice ringing clear. "That is a lie." Their heads whipped toward me. Clara's face went pale. Marcus froze with his mouth half open, and Iris actually gasped, stepping back as though she had seen a ghost. Mother Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" "The same as you," I replied calmly. "Attending to business, though unlike you I am not attempting fraud." Gasps spread through the hall. Patrons paused in their conversations, eyes widening, as they realized a scandal was unfolding before them. Clara rushed forward, her voice shrill. "She is confused. She does not know what she is saying. She is unwell." Unwell. I drew Edward's journal from my bag and held it high, the candlelight catching the worn leather. "Does this look like the possession of a woman who has lost her mind? Do I look unwell as I stand here in full command of myself before all of you?" The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. Clara's mask cracked, and Marcus clenched his fists. I turned to the auction patrons. "These people are my family, but they are not here out of love. They are here to steal, to forge my signature, to declare me mad to sell what is not theirs." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustle of papers in Clara's trembling hands. Then slowly I reached into my bag and produced the small recorder I had hidden that night at Harrow House. With a single press of a button, Marcus's voice filled the gallery, cold and undeniable. "We make her believe she has lost her mind, switch her medication, hide her things, tell her she said things she never did." The hall erupted. Gasps, whispers, the sound of disgusted voices rising in outrage. Marcus lunged forward, his face red with fury, but Gabriel stepped between us, his tall frame a shield. "Enough," Gabriel said firmly. "This woman is not mad. She is the victim of a conspiracy, and you are all hearing the proof with your own ears." Clara shrieked, tearing the folder of papers in half. Iris stood frozen, her phone slipping from her hands. Marcus backed away, his eyes wild, his composure shattered. The auction house director stepped forward, his expression grave. "Until this matter is resolved, no transaction involving Mrs. Harrow's property will proceed." He turned to Marcus and Clara, his voice sharp. "And if you attempt it again, you will answer not only to this house but to the law." I exhaled slowly, the weight of weeks lifting from my chest. But even as I stood there victorious, I saw the hatred burning in Marcus's eyes, the cold fury in Clara's. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. As Gabriel guided me out of the gallery, the crowd parting before us, I felt a shiver run down my spine. My family's masks had been torn away in public, their lies exposed, their dignity shattered. But cornered animals are the most dangerous of all, and I knew Marcus and Clara would not stop here. The trap had been sprung. The question now was how far they would go to escape it. The echo of their laughter at the auction house still haunted me. Not the light-hearted kind, but the brittle, fractured laughter of people who had been unmasked and humiliated before strangers. As Gabriel and I left through the tall doors, the whispers of patrons trailed behind us, a chorus of scandal that would spread through the city by nightfall. For a moment, I thought I had won. For a moment, I believed their lies had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. But as I soon learned, humiliation does not end a scheme. It sharpens it. 2 nights later, Gabriel arrived at the inn well after dark. His expression was grim, his eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. They met with the scribe, he said without preamble. Your son and daughter-in-law went to him directly, this time with money in hand. 50,000 pounds. The number stole my breath. Where would they have found so much? Clara sold her car, Gabriel explained. And the rest came from the credit cards they have been opening in your name. I felt a coldness spread through me. My fortune, the very thing they conspired to steal, was now being used to erase me. But Gabriel leaned closer, lowering his voice. What they do not know is that the scribe is no ordinary forger. He has been an informant for the federal authorities for months. Their transaction was recorded. Every word, every payment, every request. The words struck me like lightning. You mean they have walked into a trap? Yes, Gabriel said. But we cannot rely on the authorities alone. If cornered, they may lash out violently. And there is more. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were notes written in Marcus's hand, details of a plan that twisted my stomach into knots. They intended not only to commit me to an asylum but to hasten my death once I was inside. A falsified overdose disguised as an accident of medication. In their eyes, I was worth more gone than alive. For a long time I sat in silence, staring at the notes, my hands trembling. The betrayal I had once believed impossible had grown into something monstrous. My own son, the boy I had once lifted into my arms, had become my would-be executioner. Gabriel placed a steady hand on mine. They have made their move. Now it is time to make ours. The following evening I lit a candle in my room at the inn and spread Edward's journal across the desk. His words stared back at me. Wealth is the power to choose your own fate, and I knew then what I must do. I could no longer simply hide. I had to confront them directly, not in private where lies could twist the truth, but in a place where every word, every revelation would be witnessed by the world. Gabriel suggested a live broadcast. He had contacts in the press, people hungry for scandal, people who would seize upon a story of betrayal within a family of wealth and dignity. The idea frightened me. To bear my life, my pain before strangers watching from their homes. But fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. That night I sat before a camera in Gabriel's office, the light harsh on my face, my heart pounding. I told the story from the beginning, the note from Dr. Hale, the whispers in the kitchen, the recorder that caught Marcus's voice plotting my madness. I held up Edward's journal, proof of the fortune they sought to steal, and played the recordings for all to hear. The viewers multiplied by the minute. From dozens to hundreds to thousands. Comments streamed across the screen. Outrage, sympathy, shock. I watched as strangers rose in my defense, their words filling the void my family had carved with silence and betrayal. And then the phone rang. It was Iris. Her voice trembled as she pleaded. Please, grandmother, turn it off. You are ruining us. Everyone is watching. My friends, my teachers, my entire world is collapsing. I stared at the phone, my voice steady as I asked, and what about me, Iris? Was I not worth protecting? Was my world not worth saving before you joined their scheme? Silence. Then a whisper. I only wanted enough for school, for a chance. A bitter laugh escaped me, a chance built on my destruction. The viewers heard every word. They saw the truth written in her broken voice. Iris hung up in tears, and the comments swelled with fury. Minutes later, another call. Marcus, this time his voice hard and furious. Mother, stop this madness. You are humiliating yourself. You are destroying our family. Our family. I spat the words. A family does not plot to drive its matriarch insane. A family does not forge wills and plan overdoses. A family does not betray blood for money. His voice faltered, but he tried again. You are delusional. None of that is true. Then explain this, I said, pressing play on another recording. His own words filled the stream once more, detailing his plan to tamper with my medication until a doctor declared me incompetent. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the comments exploded. Arrest them. Protect her. Monsters. I looked into the camera, my voice steady, my hands no longer trembling. Let the world judge them, I said. I have carried the truth long enough. By the time the broadcast ended, tens of thousands had watched. Reporters were already calling, demanding interviews. Lawyers offered their services for free. Strangers from across the country sent messages of support, but as the wave of attention grew, so did the danger. Gabriel warned me the next morning that Marcus and Clara had been seen meeting with associates from the docks. Desperation had driven them into even darker company. And though the authorities now had evidence, the wheels of justice turned slowly. Until the trial began, I would remain a target. That night, as I stood by the window of the inn watching the restless sea, I realized that exposing them was only the first step. They had been humiliated, unmasked, and betrayed by their own words, but they were not finished. Their debts, their greed, their hatred, it would drive them to one last desperate act. The question was not if they would strike again, it was when, and whether I would be ready when they did. The storm that had haunted my days finally broke in the courts. By the time the trial began, my story had already spilled into every newspaper every evening, broadcast every corner of the country. Strangers stopped me in the street to press my hand, whispering words of encouragement, calling me brave when I had only been desperate. Yet their faith gave me strength as I climbed the courthouse steps, Iris at my side, Gabriel walking just behind like a watchful shadow. Inside, the courtroom was filled to the rafters. Reporters jostled for seats, cameras clicked, and the curious public pressed against the doors to witness the downfall of a family that had pretended to be perfect. At the defense table, Marcus and Clara sat stiffly, their faces pale, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. They looked smaller, somehow diminished, as though their schemes had hollowed them out from the inside. The prosecutor wasted no time. He called witnesses, presented documents, and played the recordings I had captured in the dead of night. The words that had once filled me with terror now became my salvation. We make her believe she has lost her mind. Switch her medication. Hide her things. Each phrase was a nail in the coffin of their defense. When Iris took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice trembled at first but grew steadier as she recounted the arguments she had overheard, the lies her parents had spoken, the debts that had driven them to desperation. She confessed her own part in the deception, admitting how she had spoken cruel words and spread false rumors about my health, but she did not ask for pity. Instead, she looked at the jury with tear-streaked cheeks and said simply, "I am here because it is the truth, and because she, my grandmother, deserves justice." The defense lawyer tried to discredit her. "You are pregnant, are you not? You need money. Is this not simply an attempt to secure your future by siding with the wealthiest member of your family?" Iris lifted her chin. "Yes, I need help, but I am not lying to get it. I am telling the truth because it is the right thing to do." Her words struck through the courtroom like a bell. I saw the jurors exchange glances, their faces softening. For the first time, I felt the weight of possibility settle in my chest. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with steady steps. The prosecutor asked me to describe how I had felt when I first discovered the plot against me. "I felt as though 45 years of my life had been a lie," I answered. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised as my own, and realized he had never seen me as a mother at all, only as an obstacle. "And how do you feel now, Mrs. Harrow?" the prosecutor asked. "Now," I said, meeting Marcus's eyes, "I feel free. Free of their lies, free of their manipulation, free of the chains I forged myself by believing blood alone was enough to make a family." The defense tried to paint me as vengeful, an old woman hoarding wealth she had hidden from her family. They asked about Edward's accounts, about the fortune they had not known existed. I did not deny it. "Yes," I said, "I had resources they never knew of, but those resources are not an excuse for betrayal. They are not an excuse for fraud, for forgery, for attempted murder." The trial lasted 5 days. Each hour felt like a year, each testimony a fresh wound. But when the jury retired, it took them less than 2 hours to return. The foreman rose, his voice steady as he declared the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in prison, Clara to 10. As the judge read their fates, Clara wept, her carefully built facade crumbling into sobs. Marcus simply stared forward, his eyes empty, his mouth set in a thin, hard line. I searched his face for some flicker of the boy I had once loved, but there was nothing left. When it was over, when the gavel fell and the reporters surged forward with questions, I walked out into the sunlight with Iris beside me. The world outside seemed sharper, brighter, as though I had been living under a shadow and only now remembered what light felt like. Months passed. I sold Harrow House, its memories too poisoned to endure. Instead, I purchased a smaller home on the edge of town, a place with wide windows and a garden that caught the morning sunday. There Iris and I began again. She finished her schooling with honors and decided to keep the child she carried. Her dream was to study law, inspired by what she had seen in the courtroom, determined to protect those who could not protect themselves. Sometimes we worked side by side in the garden, her hands in the soil as she told me about her studies, her hopes, her fears. Once she asked softly, "Do you ever regret adopting him?" I paused, my hands resting on the flowers we were planting. "No," I said, "I do not regret giving love. I only regret believing that love alone would be enough to change him." "And what did you learn from all of this?" she asked. I leaned back, letting the sunlight warm my face. "I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and love freely given. I learned that it is better to be alone with dignity than surrounded by betrayal. And I learned that it is never too late to begin again." In time, I established a foundation to protect the elderly from financial abuse, using Edward's fortune not for myself but for those who had no one else. Letters poured in from people I would never meet, thanking me, telling me my story had given them courage to fight their own battles. At night, I often sat by the window of my new home, watching the stars scatter across the sky. I thought of Edward, of the secret legacy he had left me, and whispered my gratitude into the dark. I thought of Dr. Hale, whose trembling note had saved my life. And I thought of Iris sleeping peacefully in the room down the hall, her child stirring within her a promise of a future built not on lies but on truth. As the years passed, I no longer feared the shadows of the past. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they had given me something far greater: freedom, strength, the chance to live a life that was truly mine. And so when people asked if I felt justice had been served, I always gave the same answer: legal justice, yes. But the truest justice was discovering that even in the ruins of betrayal, it is possible to build something new. That is the legacy I will leave behind. Not the money, not the houses, but the proof that it is never too late to rise from the ashes, to claim your own story, and to live it with dignity. The garden was alive with color when spring returned. Iris knelt among the rows of flowers, her hands dark with soil, her laughter mingling with the song of morning birds. Beside her, a small child toddled unsteadily, clutching at the stems as though they were treasures plucked from another world. I watched from the veranda, the sunlight warm on my face, and for the first time in many years, I felt a peace that was not fragile but lasting. The trial and the years of turmoil already felt like another lifetime, as though the woman who had once trembled in the halls of Harrow House was someone else entirely. I still carried the scars of betrayal, but those scars no longer defined me. They were simply reminders of the battles I had survived and of the strength I had discovered when I thought I had none left. Iris came toward me, carrying the child in her arms, her hair shining in the light. She had grown into a woman of courage and conviction, her studies in law shaping her into the advocate she had once needed for herself. When she looked at me now, it was no longer with impatience or disdain, but with gratitude and love. "Grandmother," she said softly as she set the child in my lap, "I still do not understand how you forgave me. After everything I said, after all I did, you still chose to take me back." I looked into her eyes, so full of uncertainty, and pressed my hand against hers. "Because forgiveness is not for the past, Iris. It is for the future. If I had closed my heart to you, then we would have remained broken forever. But by forgiving, I chose to give us both a chance to be whole again." Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded, holding the child close. At night, when the house grew quiet, I often sat by the fire with Edward's journal in my lap. The leather was worn now, its pages marked by my hand as well as his, and it felt less like a record of wealth and more like a symbol of survival. Edward had been right when he wrote that wealth was the power to choose your fate, but I had learned something more. True wealth was not hidden in vaults or bound by numbers. True wealth was the ability to walk away from cruelty, to stand firm against lies, and to build something new from ruins. There were times when I thought of Marcus and Clara. Their letters came from prison begging forgiveness, pleading for a chance to reconcile. I never opened them. They went directly into the fire, their ashes joining the smoke that drifted up into the night sky. Some doors I had learned must remain closed forever, and yet even in their absence they had taught me something. They had shown me that blind devotion can be dangerous, that love without boundaries can destroy rather than heal. I had given them everything believing it would one day be returned. But love, I learned, is not a debt to be repaid. It is a gift to be cherished. If it is betrayed, then it was never love at all. The foundation I created grew quickly, its work spreading beyond the boundaries of our town. I traveled to conferences, spoke to communities, and listened to countless stories from people who had faced the same horrors I once endured. Betrayal by children, manipulation by spouses, theft by relatives who claimed to act out of love. Each story carried the same ache, the same wound, and yet in every survivor I met, I saw the same spark: the refusal to surrender dignity, even when the world tried to strip it away. One evening, after speaking at a gathering of elders and their families, a woman approached me. She was frail, her steps uncertain, but her voice was steady as she took my hand. "Because of you," she said, "I told the truth. Because of you, I am still free." Her words echoed long after I returned home. They reminded me that the pain I endured had not been wasted. It had become a beacon for others, proof that even in the darkest betrayal there could be light. As the years passed, Iris finished her degree. Her child grew strong, and our home was filled with laughter once more. I traveled less, choosing instead to spend my days in the garden watching the flowers bloom and the seasons change. Sometimes I thought of Harrow House, its grand halls now belonging to another family, and I felt no sorrow. That place had been built on lies, but this one was built on truth. One night, sitting by the window as the stars spread across the sky, I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for Dr. Hale, whose trembling hand had saved me with a simple note. Gratitude for Gabriel Wynne, whose strength and brilliance had guided me when I faltered. Gratitude for Edward, who had left me not just wealth, but the chance to reclaim my life. And gratitude for myself, for finding the courage to rise when it would have been easier to fall. The journey had not been easy. It had cost me family comfort and years of peace, but it had given me something greater: freedom, dignity, the chance to finally live not as a shadow in someone else's life, but as the author of my own. And as I closed Edward's journal for the last time, I knew that my story was no longer only mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been betrayed, everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever been told they were too weak to fight. To them I say this: you are stronger than you know, and it is never too late to begin again. This story is not only about betrayal, it is about resilience, the courage to stand against those closest to you when their love becomes a mask for greed. It is about discovering that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and love freely given. It is about remembering that dignity is worth more than wealth, and that it is never too late to reclaim your life and write a new chapter. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with others who might need its message, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. Your support means the world, and together we can keep bringing these powerful stories to life.